Hello and welcome to the Inner Codes of the Beautiful. We were looking at the many facets of the sun, specifically the many manifestations of Surya as the Adityas. Today we'll look at the very first Aditya, Data or Savitr Aditya. Savitr Aditya is a very celebrated Aditya who finds mention in the Rig Veda. In fact, 11 whole hymns have been dedicated to Savitr Aditya, and there are about 170 mentions of Savitr Aditya in the Rig Veda. So clearly Savitr Aditya is someone special, and we'll try and understand why Savitr Aditya is considered to be so special. Savitr Aditya is given the status of Brahma or Prajapati as the creator. This specific Aditya, Savitr Aditya, is just like Brahma and has all the powers that Brahma has as a creator. We normally see the manifestation of Savitr Aditya as the sun in the first sign of the zodiac, which is Aries. And when sun enters Aries, we also celebrate that as the onset of the new solar year. And just like when the sun rises, the burst of effulgent light, the spectacular sun, which is dazzling and inspiring and has all the powers to create a new day and a new life and inspire a new beginning. Savitr Aditya is the Aditya which bursts forth with all the creative energies. He has all the powers to create, he has the ambition to create, and in fact, when sun is in Aries, we often find that such people tend to be impatient and can also be hot-tempered at times, purely because there's a great deal of creative activity in terms of thought and inspiration that is there and which they want to manifest. And that is basically the power of Savitr Aditya. And Savitr Aditya is the one that gives us the thoughts, the intelligence, the inspiration to go create a new future, and hence is also the one who is the one literally who helps create a new life. Savitr Aditya has been worshipped through the ages with one of the legendary mantras, which we today refer to as the Gayatri mantra. Gayatri mantra is a popular reference, but it is essentially the Savitur Gayatri because the deity that's worshipped is Savitur. Gayatri here refers to the chandas or the meter, and Gayatri is any meter which has 8 syllables. So in the Gayatri, in the Savitur Gayatri, you have 3 sets of 8 syllables, making it 24 syllables. There are of course many other mantras for other deities in the same chandas of Gayatri. But coming back to Data Aditya, Data draws from Brahma's ability to be the Vidatar, or the one who determines one's fate. It's a popular reference in India. We talk in terms of, the fate being written on one's forehead. We call it Vidhi. Vidhi draws from the root word of Vidatar. Brahma is Vidatar. And Data has to do with that ability to determine one's fate. And how does he do it? Data rules the Dhi Shakti, again from the root word. So, what is Dhi then? Dhi is basically intelligence, but it is an intelligence in a very complete sense of the word. Intelligence, it rules your quality of your thoughts, your intelligence, your mind, your level of consciousness, and even the quality that you have in terms of your subconsciousness. All of this put together is your Dhi Shakti. And Data Aditya has the ability to give you the kind of Dhi Shakti that gives one the intelligence to absorb knowledge. And when you have the intelligence to apply and absorb knowledge, one is said to have buddhi. You see the root word of dhi there in buddhi. And when one perfects this assimilation of knowledge and has a refined ability to have this knowledge, one purifies that knowledge and has shuddhi. And when one has that buddhi along with shuddhi, eventually what happens is you will have vriddhi in terms of growth. And when all three combine and you're able to apply your mind, there's a refinement of thought, there's a gradual growth in terms of the accumulation of your knowledge and ability to understand, one naturally eventually acquires siddhis or accomplishes. So all these four, in terms of your buddhi, the refinement of the knowledge of shuddhi, the growth one experiences as vriddhi, and eventually acquiring siddhis or accomplishing things, is a function of your Dhi Shakti. And the Dhi Shakti is really the gift of Data Aditya. And these 4 points that we talk about in terms of this buddhi and shuddhi and vriddhi and siddhis, in Jyotisha, it is seen through the quality of what we call as the quadrants or the kendras. One of the very unique attributes of Savitr Aditya is Savitur's ability to dispel darkness and bring light. Essentially, it's about transformation at those pivotal points, those pivotal junction points. And these junction points during a day, we know them as sandhyas. There is a very pivotal point when the night transforms into the day, we call it sunrise. And there's a pivotal point when the day transforms into the night, which we call a sunset. There are also 2 subtle points in between, which is the midday and the midnight, where the day from the morning is moving towards the evening and the night is moving towards the dawn. So these 4 junction points become very important for Savitur, and invoking Savitur at these points has its own unique attributes, and he blesses us with certain unique qualities as well. The sandhya or the junction point when sunrise occurs is called Brahma Sandhya, and chanting the Savitur Gayatri at the Brahma Sandhya is meant to give us a long life, health, intelligence and fame. The other junction in midday is called the Vishnu Sandhya. So Vishnu, we know, is the preserver, and Vishnu is also hence the one who gives us all the trappings of a good life, and he gives us the Raja Yoga. So chanting the Gayatri Mantra in the midday, in the Vishnu Sandhya, enables one to have Raja Yogas. In the evening, at dusk, the Sandhya has special significance and has an association with Lord Shiva. It's called the Mahesha Sandhya. And chanting the Gayatri, the Savitur Gayatri in the Mahesha Sandhya is supposed to give us the blessings of progeny and also long life and prosperity. But there is a very unique Sandhya which is not often done, but a few people who seek something else, who chant the Gayatri at midnight. The midnight has an association with Mahakali. It's a Kali Sandhya. And chanting of the Savitur Gayatri at that midnight junction of Kali Sandhya gives one liberation or moksha. It would be a very interesting exercise indeed to see how the Datta or Savitr Aditya manifests in individual lives for whoever has the blessings of Savitr Aditya in their birth charts, which is essentially a reflection of their individual karmas. Sun being in Aries is of course a point where Sun is exalted, bright, brilliant, ambitious, bursting forth with creativity. And you see that in a person like Rabindranath Tagore. Tagore, as we know, he wrote poems. He also wrote short stories. He also wrote novels. He wrote plays. He acted in dramas. He composed music, songs. We know Rabindra Sangeet, a unique genre itself created and attributed to him. And of course, he went on to set up Shantiniketan because he had his own ideal worldview in terms of what should be the philosophy in terms of imparting knowledge and how the education should be in terms of freeing the student rather than having rote learning and making a parrot out of the student. So here you see a situation where Sun as Datta or Savitur is in the fourth house. Fourth house represents education, represents contentment, represents peace of mind. He wanted to bring about all this, but he was creating his own unique universe, his dream, which he was sharing with the world. Let's look at maybe another field in the game of cricket. We take two personalities who both excelled, who both had many accomplishments, and where they are considered to be among the greatest exponents of the game. Brian Lara, the Prince of the Port of Spain. Brian Lara, he has the highest score in first class cricket. He scored about 501, and he has the highest test score. He scored about 400. Clearly one of the game's greatest batsmen. But the very interesting thing, he had Sun in Aries in the 10th house, which has to do with his career and profession. But this Sun has also the burden of Saturn conjoining with it. So he had this unique situation where he has a kind of a dubious record of being in the losing side the second highest times. So he was carrying the burden of the team. Invariably, for those who follow cricket would know that Lara almost single-handedly was carrying the burden of the team post the highs of the West Indies in the 80s and up to the early 90s. After that, it was Lara carrying the burden. because of the Sun conjoining with Saturn, but individually there was a lot of greatness. And if you take the case of Sachin Tendulkar, again Sun exalted in Aries in the 9th house. Wisden considers him as the second greatest test batsman after Bradman and the second best one-day player after one-day batsman after Vivian Richards. Again, a career of amazing highs. But he has his Sun in the 9th house. 9th house is about Purva Punya, about luck, also about the blessings of the Guru. And invariably, when you read upon Sachin Tendulkar, you would eventually read about his first coach, Ramakant Achrekar, who had this massive influence on Sachin Tendulkar's eventual growth. So here again you see the Savitr or Data Aditya manifesting, where there's a great deal of excellence and creativity that comes about in the field that one pursues. I was mentioning about Data Aditya having this ability to create, be like the Prajapati. A creator would also mean a certain pioneering quality where the creator is creating with no precedent whatsoever, and he or she is carving out her own niche in her own space with her own inspiration or his own inspiration, and coming up with something that is self-sufficient and sustainable as a universe. In movie making, we would call a person like this an auteur who does everything, who is able to come up with the concept, write the story, probably write the screenplay, and sometimes even manage in terms of the visual aspects of the movie, the editing and so on. And one of the most influential movie makers was Akira Kurosawa. Kurosawa is considered one of the greats, one of the greatest filmmakers and the most influential filmmakers. And Kurosawa, true to this quality of Prajapati, he had a lot of devices which he created himself, so to say, and which has influenced future generation of filmmakers. Like for instance, the axial cut or the cut to motion, where, for instance, instead of what was the precedent earlier, if there is a chase, it's the same camera that's following through the chase. Here he had multiple narratives of the same chase going on, which is the cut to motion. And then you also had the other kind of a counterpoint in terms of the music, which was kind of ironical, not syncing with what was being shown visually, but the sound or the music becoming almost like an ironic counterpoint. These were contributions of Kurosawa, which were devices that he created. Here you again see this quality of Prajapati coming in. If you were to take another celebrated filmmaker who also created a genre by himself, the gangster genre, Francis Ford Coppola. So when he made Godfather trilogy, he eventually came to be known for creating a whole new genre itself, and which has influenced future filmmakers. Of course, he is one of the most successful filmmakers, winning 5 Academy Awards and many Globe Awards and so on. Then you also have Tarantino, Quentin Tarantino, another filmmaker who came up with his own unique take in terms of a non-linear kind of a timeline, which is again something which has been like a contribution. They call it the Tarantino effect. These are all filmmakers who have created their own universes and somehow even created whole genres. Some have created devices, but the bottom line is they have created something which has become a precedent for others eventually. This ability to create and envision a new world is what Data Aditya is all about. If you were to take the world of music composer, 20 musicals, he owns the genre whether Jesus Christ Superstar or Cats or Phantom of the Opera or so many other musicals. One of these qualities is, of course, the quality of Data Aditya, which is to burst forth with creativity, where it seems to be like there are no limits at all to such creativity, which is why these people tend to be prolific, because there's a need to create all the time. On the other hand, you have someone like Vangelis, who also has Sun in Aries. Vangelis, he carved a niche in what we call as electronic music, but he had a very different take to it. He pretty much played all the instruments, not just the synthesizers. He played pretty much all the instruments, the acoustic instruments, and so on. And he fused electronic music with classical, with progressive rock, and so on and so forth. And he carved a niche, and he's created music for, of course, movies like The Chariots of Fire and Blade Runner and so on. But he has put a stamp on the way we see electronic music, or the way we view electronic music, and he's done it single-handedly. This is again the ability to have the kind of skills and capabilities to pretty much cover all aspects of the genre. If you take hard rock, Ritchie Blackmore is one of those contributors. He founded Deep Purple, and along with Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath, we know they are called the triumvirate of hard rock and metal. They laid the foundation. But even in that, all of them are exceptional bands, exceptional musicians. But Ritchie Blackmore, he fused his own ideas in terms of what he calls as medieval music, and created almost like a mini genre of medieval rock. And he has a distinct guitar sound with his medieval rock. And he has, of course, become one of the biggest influences of the succeeding generation of musicians. So here again, you see all of these musicians, all of these artists, they are carving a niche where there's really no precedent before, but they've carved a niche, and they've given certain ways and methods to approach what was the approach as against the approach that was earlier. So this kind of a pioneering quality is a telltale sign of Data Aditya. When it comes to worldviews or a philosophy, again, you have people with Sun in Aries who have had a new vision of the world and have propounded that in a very compelling manner. Whether one accepts it or not is a different thing, but they have done it with a great deal of conviction themselves. Richard Dawkins, for example, is another example of Sun in Aries. He, of course, believes that there is no supernatural being or God that has created the universe, and he, of course, wrote books like The Selfish Gene, and he is the father of what we today know as the meme. But the point here is, he was able to come up with an alternative view, an alternative worldview, with a great deal of conviction. Same in the case of Karl Marx, another person with Sun in Aries. Here, Sun in Aries is in his third house. He viewed everything in terms of a class struggle, and he was the author of the Communist Manifesto, the Das Kapital, one of the founders, one of the biggest influencers of the philosophy of communism. The interesting thing here is, because his Sun conjoins with Saturn, he has this natural sympathy towards the underprivileged or the worker class. Saturn ruling the worker class and ruling hard work, hard labor, and so on, or all of those were not put in an elite pedestal. So here you see a situation where Sun is in Aries, is exalted, but since it's conjoined with Saturn, he takes up the cause of the underprivileged and creates this whole new world in terms of viewing everything as a class struggle and pushing in terms of the idea of communism and equality of rights and privileges. There's another significant attribute of Data Aditya, which is the depth of knowledge and learning. We need to keep in mind that Sun lords the natural fifth house of Leo, and the depth of knowledge, the application of the mind, and the depth of knowledge also comes from the fifth house. So if you were to take the example of the primatologist Jane Goodall, she has Sun in Aries in the fifth house. And Jane Goodall was one of those pioneering scientists who worked with chimpanzees. And not only she had a great level of depth in terms of acquiring knowledge in a new field, she also had certain unconventional, what was considered amongst the scientific fraternity as unconventional, because like I was mentioning, Data Aditya creates its own world. She attributed certain human personalities and qualities to chimpanzees, which of course was not easily accepted at that point in time. She attributed personalities, characteristic traits very similar to humans, and even had names instead of numbers for the chimpanzees, the individual animals that she was studying. But specifically from the depth, how deep was that knowledge? She did research by observing a family of chimpanzees for 60 years. I suppose we have a reasonably good understanding of Data or Savitr Aditya. Before we wrap up this episode, I'd like to give you one final example where the power of Savitr Aditya has resonated through millennia. People still cherish it, people still aim to that ideal, which they call as the Ramarajya, a nation where every single person in that country is accorded rights and privileges equally and in a very just fashion. Lord Rama had Sun in Aries in his 10th house. 10th house is the field of one's work, profession, and the field where one's dharma is manifested. So that was the worldview, an ideal worldview that Lord Rama had in terms of how a kingdom ought to be. And by all accounts, he looks like he succeeded, which is the reason it resonates till the day as Ramaraja. Thanks for joining me. Till we meet again, take care and look closely. It might be beautiful.